For 7 days straight, my parents were ghosts. No calls, no texts, no answers. They never went that long without reaching out. Not once in my entire life. Even when they traveled or were sick, they always checked in, always left a message. For a week there was nothing but silence. And that silence had been gnawing at me, like a rat chewing through the wires of my mind. By the 5th day, I couldn't focus at work. My coworkers thought I was being short with them. But the truth was, every second felt stretched, hollow, filled with the echo of unanswered questions. I kept staring at my phone, refreshing messages that weren't there, checking my call log as if maybe I had missed them somehow. But the screen never changed, just an empty inbox. By the 6th night, I lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling. My apartment in the city felt too small, suffocating with worry. My heart pounded in my chest every time. I imagined something had happened. A car accident. A break-in, or worse, something unspeakable. By Friday morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag, tossed it in the trunk, and got in my car. The highway stretched ahead of me, empty and endless, but my thoughts filled it. Every mile was like a beat of dread. My parents' house was 3 hours away. A modest home tucked in a quiet neighborhood, where kids rode bikes and retirees tended to their lawns. It wasn't the kind of place where bad things happened. At least, not on the surface. But as I drove closer, I felt something dark clinging to me. Something heavy pressing against my chest. When I finally turned into their street, my stomach dropped. Even before I parked, I could see it. The front door was ajar. Not wide open, just a crack, but it was wrong. My father was meticulous about locking doors. He grew up in a rougher part of town and always told me that security was peace of mind. Even when he stepped outside to grab the mail, he locked the door behind him. Seeing it left open was like spotting blood on a white shirt. Impossible to ignore. Impossible to mistake. I killed the engine and just sat there for a long moment, staring at that door, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I didn't want to get out of the car. Some part of me knew that whatever I found inside, I couldn't unsee. Finally, I forced myself to move. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked up the path. My hand shook as I reached out to the handle. "Mom?" My voice cracked, the words sounding foreign in the heavy silence. "Dad?" No answer, just the creak of the door as I pushed it wider. The smell hit me first. Stale air, tinged with something sharp. Sweat? Maybe, or dust disturbed after too long. The house felt wrong. It wasn't just quiet. It was heavy, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Inside, the living room looked like it had been torn apart. Chairs knocked over, the coffee table shoved sideways. A lamp shattered in the corner. Family photos that once hung neatly on the wall now lay scattered across the carpet. Their glass frames cracked and splintered. One of them, my graduation photo, had been stomped on. The glass ground into the carpet. I froze, scanning the room. My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't just messy. It was violated. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the emergency number. But then I hesitated. I didn't know what I was calling in yet. What would I even say? That my parents hadn't answered for a week, and now their living room looked ransacked. I needed to be sure. I needed to know more. That's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost thought I imagined it. A ragged inhale, shallow, uneven, then the faintest sob. I froze in place, every hair on my arms standing up. The sound was coming from the wardrobe in the corner of the room. It was old dark oak standing against the far wall, a piece of furniture I'd seen my whole life, where my mother kept blankets and spare coats. In that moment, it looked monstrous, looming in the shadows. My chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get out, to call the police and wait outside. But something stronger pulled me forward. I crossed the room on unsteady legs. Each step felt louder than it should, like the floorboards were shouting at me. My hand reached for the wardrobe's handle. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice trembling. No reply, just another shallow breath. I gripped the wooden handles and pulled. The doors creaked open slowly, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. And there, crumpled between hanging coats, was a small figure. My little nephew. His face was pale, his clothes dirty and rumpled, his small body shaking as if the very act of existing was exhausting him. He looked up at me with wide, glassy eyes, and then he collapsed forward into my arms. I caught him, my heart leaping into my throat. He was so light, too light, like he hadn't eaten properly in days. His skin was clammy against my hands. Hey, it's me, Samson," I whispered, brushing the hair back from his forehead. "It's Uncle Sam. You're okay. You're safe now." But he didn't respond. He didn't say a single word. He just clung to me weakly, his small fists gripping the fabric of my shirt, as if letting go would mean losing everything. And in that silence, I heard more than I ever wanted to know, because silence can scream. And his silence told me something had happened here, something terrible, something that went beyond a simple disappearance. I looked around the house again, holding him tight. And for the first time in my life, I wished I hadn't come alone. The truth was waiting for me inside these walls, and it was going to be darker than I could ever imagine. The minutes after finding my nephew stretched like hours. I sank onto the torn-up couch, cradling him against me, trying to steady my own breathing. His chest rose and fell quickly, shallow, as though every breath cost him strength. "Where are they?" I whispered, half to myself, half to him. He didn't answer. He wouldn't even look at me. His gaze stayed fixed on the wall, unfocused, distant. I felt the weight of the silence pressing down again. And I knew this was only the beginning. Whatever had taken my parents away had left a mark on him too, and I was about to uncover it. The weight of my nephew's silence stayed with me long after I carried him out of the ruined living room. His small frame felt almost hollow in my arms, as if fear had hollowed him out from the inside. I set him gently on the couch, brushing shards of glass away with my sleeve, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He kept staring at the floor, frozen, clutching the fabric of my jacket like a lifeline. I tried again, softly. "Where's Mom? Where's Dad?" Do you know what happened? Nothing, just that vacant, distant stare, and his breathing that hitched every few seconds like he was fighting back tears too big for his tiny body. I knew then he had seen something no child should have. The house loomed around us, heavy with the scent of dust and something sour that stuck to my throat. I wanted to scoop him back up and run, call the cops, let someone else deal with whatever nightmare had unfolded here. But the truth was, I couldn't. My parents were missing. And this boy, my sister's son, only 8 years old, was the only thread left in the dark tangle. I pulled out my phone, thumb hovering over the emergency number again. My hand shook. What if whoever had done this was still nearby? What if calling the police made things worse, dragged us into something bigger than I could even imagine? But then, as I hesitated, I noticed something on the floor near the kitchen doorway. A smear, dark reddish-brown, dragged across the tile like something heavy had been pulled through. My stomach turned, my throat tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Blood. I pressed my nephew closer without thinking, shielding his view, though his eyes didn't flicker. He had already seen enough, too much. I forced myself to stand, my legs stiff and trembling, and followed the smear. Each step echoed in the silence, too loud, like the house itself was warning me away. The smear led into the kitchen, then cut off abruptly near the back door. The door was locked. Deadbolt snapped in place, chain still hanging, which made no sense. If something, or someone, had been dragged out, how was the door secured behind them? A chill crept over me, deeper than fear. It was like stepping into a story I didn't understand, and every clue I uncovered only twisted it tighter around me. I turned back toward the living room, but stopped dead when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine, upstairs, slow, deliberate, pacing across the floorboards. My mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed to run, to take my nephew and get out, but my feet refused to move. I just stood there, staring up at the ceiling, listening as the boards groaned under unseen weight. He stirred for the first time, tugging weakly at my jacket. His lips parted, the smallest whisper scraping out, raw and broken. "Don't go up." It was the first thing he had said. And his voice wasn't just fear. It was certainty, like he knew exactly what waited above. But I couldn't ignore it. My parents might still be here, alive. I knelt in front of him, gripping his shoulders. "Stay here. Don't move, okay? I'll be right back." His eyes widened, tears spilling over, but he didn't fight me. He just nodded once, slow, and curled into himself on the couch. I grabbed the heavy flashlight my dad kept by the kitchen door and started up the stairs. Each step creaked, groaning louder than the footsteps had, like the house itself didn't want me intruding further. The air grew colder, thicker, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and makes your breath visible. By the time I reached the landing, my pulse was slamming in my ears. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with familiar doors. My old bedroom, the guest room, my parents' room at the far end, all closed. I raised the flashlight, my hand trembling so badly the beam shook across the walls. "Hello?" My voice came out hoarse, weak. Silence. Then, a door creaked open. My parents' room. I froze, throat closing, every nerve in my body screaming to turn back. But my feet moved anyway, dragging me down the hall. The door yawned wider with each step until I stood at the threshold. The flashlight beam cutting across the bed. Empty. The sheets were torn, the mattress half off the frame. Drawers hung open, clothes scattered, and on the wall, scrawled in something dark and smeared, were 4 words. He is not gone. I staggered back, my hand clamping over my mouth. The words weren't just written. They were carved, gouged into the plaster beneath the paint. The grooves were deep, ragged, like someone had clawed them out in desperation. Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I spun, swinging the flashlight wildly, the beam slicing through empty air. Nothing. The hall was empty, silent. But I knew, with every instinct I had, that I wasn't alone. Something was here. Something that had walked these floors, breathed this air, written those words. I backed out of the room slowly, my heart racing, until I nearly stumbled down the stairs. My nephew was still on the couch, curled up, his eyes darting toward me as if he could see what clung to me from that hallway. I forced a shaky smile I didn't feel. We're leaving. He didn't argue. He just reached for my hand, gripping it like iron, and together we stepped out into the night. The cool air hit me like a slap, sharp and clean compared to the suffocating heaviness of the house. I half expected to see someone waiting in the driveway, watching. But the street was empty. For now, as I strapped him into the car, I couldn't shake the image of those carved words. He is not gone. I didn't know who had written them. I didn't know if they were meant for me, for my parents, or for someone or something else entirely. But I knew one thing. This wasn't just about my parents disappearing. This was the beginning of something far bigger. Something that already had its hooks in my family. And it wasn't going to let go. When I started the engine, my nephew finally spoke again, his voice barely audible over the rumble. He's still in there. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles white. Who? His eyes shifted toward the house, glassy and haunted. The man in the dark. And before I could ask anything else, he shut his eyes, as if speaking the words had drained the last of his strength. The road stretched ahead of us, black and endless, and I realized with bone-deep certainty, whatever had taken my parents wasn't finished. And now it had seen me too. The road stretched on, empty and endless, my headlights slicing through the night like blades, but the silence inside the car was heavier than anything outside. My nephew's words hung in the air, echoing over and over in my mind. The man in the dark. He had said it like a fact, not a fear, like someone he knew all too well. His head rested against the window, eyes shut tight, but his small body trembled in his sleep as though the nightmare had followed him even into unconsciousness. I gripped the wheel tighter, veins standing out across my knuckles. Every instinct in me screamed to drive until daylight, to never look back, to put as many miles as I could between us and that house. But my parents were still missing. My sister was nowhere to be found. And those words carved into the wall. He is not gone. Gone where? I pushed harder on the gas, the engine growling as the empty fields blurred past. I kept catching movement in the periphery of my vision. Shadows, darting between the trees, shapes that bent wrong against the moonlight. Every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. But my gut told me different. Something was keeping pace with us. I thought about calling the police again. But what would I say? That I had found my nephew hiding in a ransacked house, that my parents had vanished, that I had read a message clawed into the wall like a warning from the grave. They'd dismiss me, chalk it up to paranoia, tell me to wait 48 hours before filing a missing persons report. They didn't know the way the air in that house had pressed down like a living thing, or the way my nephew had whispered not to go, upstairs with a certainty no child should possess. I drove for over an hour before my body gave in to exhaustion. My hands were shaking too much to hold the wheel steady, and my vision blurred at the edges. I pulled into an empty gas station, one of those old roadside stops with flickering lights and a single pump. The place looked abandoned, the windows dusty, but the neon open sign glowed faintly, buzzing against the night. I parked, cut the engine, and turned to check on him. His breathing was shallow, his fists still clenched even in sleep, but he was alive. For now, that was all that mattered. I slid out of the car, stretching my legs, and the cold air bit at my skin. For the first time since leaving the house, I let myself breathe. The gas station was silent except for the buzzing light. No cars, no clerk visible inside. Just me, my nephew, and the dark. I took a step toward the pump, then froze. A reflection in the glass door caught my eye. Not mine. Tall, thin, a shadow standing just behind me. I spun, fists clenched, but the lot was empty. Nothing moved but the long grass at the edges, swaying gently in the night wind. My pulse thundered in my ears. I turned back, staring at the glass. The reflection was gone. I pumped the gas quickly, my eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. Each second felt like it stretched into an eternity, as though something was waiting just beyond the light, crouched and patient. When I slid back into the car, I locked the doors out of pure instinct. My nephew stirred, his lips parting slightly, his voice breaking through the thick silence. He followed us. I swallowed hard. Who? His eyes opened just a slit, pupils dilated, staring past me into the rearview mirror. The man in the dark. I whipped around, flashlight in hand, scanning the back seat. Empty. But in the mirror, for the briefest flicker of a moment, I swore I saw him. A shape too tall, too thin, sitting just behind me, head tilted as though studying us. No face, just shadow, and then nothing. The flashlight beam cut through the empty seat, and my chest heaved, each breath ragged and desperate. I started the engine, tires squealing against the gravel as I pulled away from the station, heart pounding like a war drum. The road swallowed us again, but the darkness no longer felt empty. It pressed against the car windows, thick and suffocating, as if alive. My nephew didn't speak again, but I could feel him shaking beside me. His small hand slid into mine, clutching with surprising strength, as if he knew letting go would mean losing me to the thing that hunted us. We drove until the sun rose, faint light bleeding into the horizon, turning the fields gray instead of black. For a moment I let myself believe the daylight would drive it away, that the man in the dark was bound to shadows. But then I saw it, scratched into the hood of my car, deep grooves fresh in the paint. 4 words, "He is not gone," the same words carved into my parents' wall. My breath caught in my throat, bile rising as I slammed the brakes and lurched to a stop on the shoulder. My nephew sat up instantly, eyes wide, staring at the hood like he already knew what I had seen. "He wants you to know," he whispered. I turned to him, my voice shaking. "Know what?" "That he won't stop." I stared at the scratches, at the sunlight glinting off the torn metal, and felt the world tilt beneath me. This wasn't random. This wasn't just some nightmare bleeding into reality. Whoever or whatever the man in the dark was, he was inside our lives now, threading himself through every mile, every breath, every heartbeat. And he wasn't going to let go. I pressed down on the accelerator again, but this time it didn't feel like escape. It felt like a chase. And I wasn't sure anymore who was the hunter and who was the prey. The road stretched endlessly before me, the pale light of morning bleeding into the horizon, but it offered no comfort. My nephew slept fitfully in the passenger seat, twitching every so often like he was fighting something in his dreams. I wanted to reach over, shake him awake, tell him it was over, but I couldn't lie to him. Not when those words were still gouged into my mind as if they'd been carved. There with a knife. He is not gone. The message on the hood hadn't faded in daylight. In fact, it seemed bolder, as if sunlight was feeding it, making it glisten against the torn metal. Each time I glanced at it through the windshield, I felt like the words were staring back at me, watching, mocking. I drove faster, desperate to leave them behind. But they clung to me, heavy and unshakable. The radio was off, the hum of the engine the only sound filling the car. Silence had grown too loud, almost unbearable, so I flicked it on. Static filled the speakers, sharp and sudden, before clearing into a faint voice. Not music, not a station, a voice. "Samson." I slammed the knob, cutting it off instantly. My nephew jerked awake with a soft cry, eyes darting around in panic before settling on me. "It's okay," I lied. "You're safe." But the lie barely made it past my lips before I knew how hollow it was. Nothing about this was safe. Not the words. Not the house. Not the thing that followed us like a shadow stitched to our heels. We drove in silence again, but his eyes never left me, wide and watchful, like he sensed the lie too. After what felt like hours, I pulled into a diner on the edge of a small town. A neon sign buzzed above the roof, "Eats," flickering weakly. I wanted to keep driving, to never stop, but exhaustion gripped me harder than fear. I had to regroup, even if it was just for a cup of coffee and a moment of stillness. Inside, the diner was warm, almost too warm, filled with the smell of grease and coffee grounds. A waitress with tired eyes handed me a menu, but I barely glanced at it. My nephew pushed scrambled eggs around his plate without eating. His shoulders hunched like he wanted to disappear. "You need to eat," I told him softly. He shook his head. "He's here." I froze. "What do you mean?" His fork clattered against the plate as he looked up, his voice trembling. "The man in the dark. He doesn't need shadows. He's always here." The hair on my neck rose, prickling with cold sweat. I scanned the diner, just a few truckers at the counter, a couple in the corner, the waitress refilling coffee. Normal, too normal. Yet his words pressed down on me heavier than anything I could see. I leaned closer, keeping my voice low. "How do you know that?" He whispered, almost inaudible. "Because he talks to me when you're asleep." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. My fingers tightened around the coffee mug until I thought it would shatter. I wanted to demand answers, press him for details, but the terror in his eyes told me enough. He wasn't lying. He couldn't have been. The door chimed then, drawing my eyes up. A man walked in, tall, too tall, his frame bending slightly to fit beneath the doorway. His suit was black, sharp against his pale skin, and though the diner's light spilled across everyone else's faces, his features seemed blurred, unfinished, as if he didn't quite belong in the light. My nephew grabbed my wrist under the table, his nails digging into my skin. "It's him," he breathed. The man didn't look at us. Not directly. He slid into a booth in the back, folding long fingers together on the table, his head tilting ever so slightly in our direction. I forced myself to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. "We're leaving," I whispered. We slipped out quickly, the bell above the door jangling, the cool air slapping against my face like a wake-up call. I almost ran to the car, my nephew clinging to me, his small breath sharp and quick. As I unlocked the door, I couldn't stop myself from looking back through the diner's glass window. The booth where the man had sat was empty, but etched into the fogged glass where his hand must have rested was a message, clear as day. "You can't hide." My nephew saw it too. He buried his face in my jacket, and I drove without looking back. The town disappeared behind us, swallowed by distance, but the words stayed. They pulsed in my mind with every mile. "You can't hide." I didn't know where we were going anymore. I didn't know if anywhere was far enough, bright enough, safe enough. All I knew was that whatever had taken my parents, whatever had written those words on the wall and the hood, was no longer content to stay in the house. It was following us, and it was getting closer. By the time night fell again, exhaustion was a weight I couldn't bear. I pulled into a roadside motel, the kind with peeling paint and buzzing lights, and checked us in under a false name without thinking why. Just instinct. Inside the room, I pushed a chair under the door handle, closed the blinds tight, and double-checked every lock. My nephew curled up on the bed, too tired to protest, but his eyes flickered toward the shadows in the corners, wide and glassy. I lay down on the other bed, but sleep didn't come. The room was too quiet, the kind of quiet that roared in your ears. Hours passed in silence until finally I closed my eyes. I woke to the sound of breathing. Not mine, not his. Slow, deep, right beside my bed. My eyes snapped open, but the room was pitch black. The air was heavier than before, pressing down like a weight. I reached for the lamp, my fingers trembling. But before I could switch it on, a voice slid through the darkness. Low, smooth, too close. "Samson." I froze, every muscle in my body locked. My nephew whimpered softly from the other bed, and I knew he heard it too. The lamp finally clicked on, spilling harsh yellow light across the room. Nothing. The chair was still against the door. The locks were still bolted, but the air smelled different now, sharp, metallic, like blood left too long in the heat. On the mirror above the dresser, written in the condensation as though from an unseen breath, were 3 words. "He is here." My hands shook as I grabbed my nephew, pulling him close. His small body trembled against mine, and his whisper cut into me like glass. "I told you he never left." The mirror dripped, the words sliding down slowly, stretching, as if melting into the glass itself. I didn't sleep again that night, and by dawn I knew one thing with certainty. The man in the dark wasn't just haunting the house. He wasn't just watching. He was hunting us. The sun crept weakly through the thin motel curtains, pale streaks of light cutting across the stained carpet. I hadn't closed my eyes all night. My nephew had drifted into uneasy sleep against me, his breaths shallow, his small fingers twisted tightly into my shirt as though he feared I might vanish the moment he let go. I sat stiff, my muscles aching, but I didn't move. My eyes stayed locked on the mirror above the dresser, waiting for the words to disappear. They didn't. He is here lingered in condensation that should have faded long ago, dripping slowly, like the message itself was alive. I watched it for hours until daylight washed most of it away, leaving only faint streaks like scars across the glass. By the time my nephew stirred, the air had lightened just enough for me to stand. "We have to leave," I whispered. His eyes opened, red-rimmed and tired, but he nodded without question. I pulled the chair from under the handle and cracked the door open, scanning the lot outside, empty, save for a single truck idling at the far end. The driver's seat looked unoccupied, but I didn't linger to check. We moved quickly, sliding into the car, bags still half-packed. The engine roared to life, and I pulled away from the motel without looking back. Every nerve in my body screamed to get distance, to put space between us and whatever had seeped into that room during the night. But the feeling clung to me like a second skin. No matter how far I drove, the weight of that voice, that breath against my ear, stayed with me. We drove for hours, past fields that stretched endlessly, past ghost towns that looked like they hadn't seen life in years. I didn't know where I was going, only that stopping felt like surrender. My nephew sat silently, staring out the window with an expression far too old for his face. Every so often his lips moved, whispering words I couldn't hear. Eventually I pulled into a rest stop, a squat building with vending machines buzzing faintly in the corner. The place was deserted, the silence broken only by the distant hum of the highway. I parked close to the door and turned to him. "You need food," I said gently. "We both do." He didn't look at me, just nodded faintly. His gaze stayed fixed, on the shadows where the light from the building didn't reach. Inside, the air smelled stale like dust and cheap coffee. The vending machines blinked with dull neon, and I dug into my wallet with shaking hands, feeding crumpled bills into the slot. As the machine whirred and a bag of chips dropped, I glanced at the glass doors leading back outside. Someone was standing there, tall, thin, too still. The bag hit the tray with a soft thud, but I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat as I locked eyes with the figure. For a second I thought I saw a face, blurred, indistinct, like it was still being painted. Then with a blink it was gone. The glass reflected only the empty lot. My hand shook as I grabbed the food and rushed back to the car. My nephew's eyes flicked up as I opened the door. "You saw him, didn't you?" he asked softly. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We ate in silence, the crunch of chips loud in the heavy air. Every few seconds I checked the mirrors, half expecting to see that blurred face staring back. The lot stayed empty, but emptiness no longer felt like safety. It felt like a trick. By the time night fell again, I was running on fumes, every muscle screaming with exhaustion. I pulled into another town, this one larger, its streets lined with shuttered shops and flickering street lights. I checked us into a different motel, the clerk barely lifting his head as I slid cash across the counter. The room was no better than the last. A single bed, thin blankets, wallpaper peeling at the edges. I pushed the dresser against the door this time, closed the curtains until no light slipped through. My nephew curled up immediately, his small frame tense even as his eyes closed. I sat by the window, watching the shadows shift under the streetlight outside. The silence pressed in again, thick and suffocating. I must have dozed, because when I opened my eyes, the room was darker. Too dark. The streetlight outside had gone out, and someone was standing in the corner. I froze, my breath catching as my eyes adjusted. The figure was tall, impossibly tall, its head nearly grazing the ceiling. The darkness clung to it, making its edges blur, its limbs too long, too wrong. My nephew whimpered in his sleep, curling tighter under the blanket. "Leave us alone," I whispered, my voice shaking. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. I grabbed the lamp and flicked it on, light flooding the room. Empty. The corner was bare, the shadows retreating. But the blanket on my nephew's bed was damp, cold, as though someone had stood there dripping. I sat awake the rest of the night, the lamp blazing, every nerve in my body strung tight. When dawn broke, I shook him gently. "We can't stay here. We have to go." He looked at me with tired eyes, his voice barely a whisper. "He's not letting us go." I didn't respond. I couldn't. We left the town behind, but the words followed us. On road signs, etched faintly like scratches. On the windshield, fogging for a moment before fading. Even in my own reflection for a flicker of a second, the words curved across my skin. "He is here." It no longer mattered how far we ran. The truth pressed down with every mile. We weren't escaping him. We were carrying him with us. The highway blurred into an endless gray ribbon beneath the tires, stretching into a horizon that never seemed to get closer. My nephew sat slumped in the seat, his eyelids heavy, his face pale and drawn. He hadn't truly slept in days, not the kind of sleep that rested the body. Each time his breathing slowed, his muscles twitched, jerking him back toward waking, as if he was afraid of what waited when his eyes closed. I drove with one hand on the wheel, the other gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary, knuckles white. Every mirror felt like a trap, each reflective surface holding its breath, waiting for me to look and see him there again, blurred, bent, always too close. The last words on the windshield lingered in my mind like an infection. He is here, not past tense, not a threat, a fact. We stopped for gas at a lonely station off the interstate, the kind of place where time seemed to stall. The pumps were old, the display numbers worn smooth by decades of use. The clerk inside barely looked up as I slid a crumpled bill across the counter. My nephew didn't follow me in. He stayed in the car, his eyes locked on the mirrors, lips moving in a silent prayer or a warning. When I came back out, a folded piece of paper was stuck under the wiper blade. My chest clenched as I pulled it free, my hands trembling before I even opened it. 4 words, scrawled in black ink, shaky but deliberate. You brought him back. My throat tightened. I looked around the lot, scanning every corner, every shadow. But the place was deserted. Only the distant hum of the highway filled the silence. My nephew's eyes were wide when I slid back into the car. He didn't ask what the paper said. Maybe he already knew. I crumpled it in my fist and threw it onto the floor, started the engine, and drove until the station was a speck in the rearview mirror. The road curved through forest now, trees pressing in close, their branches clawing at the sky. The daylight struggled to break through the canopy, leaving us in a dim twilight. My nephew finally spoke, his voice small but steady. You don't remember, do you? I glanced at him, confusion twisting in my chest. Remember what? His eyes didn't meet mine. They stayed fixed on the trees. Why, he's here. A chill ran through me. What are you talking about? His silence stretched on so long I thought he wouldn't answer. But then he whispered, You made him come back. The words hit harder than the note had. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but his tone held no uncertainty. He believed it, maybe even more than I did. The forest grew darker, the road winding deeper until I could barely see the sky. I thought about pulling over, about demanding he explain, but something in me resisted. Some part of me knew I didn't want the answer. By the time we emerged from the trees, night had already fallen. A small town sprawled ahead, its lights faint but steady, a fragile beacon in the surrounding dark. I pulled into a diner at the edge of town, almost identical to the last one, though this one hummed with more life. A handful of cars filled the lot, the faint sound of laughter spilling from the windows. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and frying oil. People chatted over plates of food, the sound almost alien after so much silence. We slid into a booth, and for a moment I let myself breathe. But it didn't last. The waitress poured coffee, her smile polite. But when her eyes met mine, her expression faltered. She froze, the pot trembling in her hands. My nephew stared at her, his face unreadable. Are you all right? I asked, my voice tight. Her eyes darted toward the window, then back to me. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She set the pot down abruptly and walked away, almost stumbling. My nephew leaned forward. She saw him. The words chilled me. I turned to the window, heart hammering. At first, there was nothing but our reflection in the glass, warped by the darkness outside. But then I saw it, the faint outline of something tall, impossibly tall, standing among the parked cars. Its shape didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood there as if waiting. I blinked and it was gone. The rest of the meal passed in silence. Neither of us touched the food. When we left, the lot was empty. But the smell of damp earth clung to the air, sharp and metallic. We drove to a motel nearby, this one cleaner, brighter. I double-checked every lock, pushed furniture against the door, even nailed a blanket across the window. My nephew curled into bed, too exhausted to resist sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed, the note from the gas station still burning in my mind. You brought him back. The words gnawed at me, dredging up flashes of things I couldn't quite place. Shadows in my childhood home. Nights I'd woken certain someone was standing in the corner of my room. Whispers I'd told myself were dreams. I remembered my parents' faces when I was young, the way they'd hush me, tell me to close my eyes, to never speak of it. I remembered a closet door that never stayed shut, And I remembered a promise, made long ago in a trembling voice. If you don't feed him, he'll follow you forever. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. The memory slipped away before I could hold it, but it was enough to leave me shaking. I didn't realize I'd fallen asleep until I woke to the sound of the television buzzing with static. The screen glowed faintly, though I hadn't turned it on. My nephew sat upright in bed, his eyes wide and glassy, staring at the screen. "Don't watch it," I said quickly, but my voice sounded far away, muffled. The static shifted, shapes forming within it. A tall figure, blurred, leaning closer. My nephew whimpered, covering his ears as if the sound hurt. The screen crackled louder, and for a moment, I swore I heard words buried in the static. "Samson, you remember." The screen flickered violently, then went black. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound had been. I turned to my nephew, pulling him into my arms. His skin was cold, clammy, his body trembling. "You didn't dream it, did you?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. The lamp beside the bed flickered once, twice, then went out, plunging the room into darkness. And in the corner, taller than the ceiling should allow, he stood. He was there. No blur now, no half glimpse in glass or shadow. The man in the dark filled the corner of the room, his shape bending wrong against the geometry of the walls, limbs too long, body stretched as if the space itself was warping to contain him. His head tilted slowly, a jerky, unnatural movement that made the air groan like old wood. My nephew clutched at me, his small body rigid, his breath fast and shallow. I pulled him tighter against my chest, my own heartbeat crashing in my ears. But the man didn't move closer. He simply stood, his presence enough to suffocate the room. The lamp on the nightstand flickered once more, a faint glow that pushed back only inches of the dark. In that thin circle of light, I saw his face, or what was trying to be a face. Hollow sockets where eyes should be, a mouth too wide, stretched in something that might have been a smile, skin that looked less like flesh and more like smoke pressed into shape. The words that had haunted every surface, every reflection, formed on his mouth now, though no sound came. "He is here." My throat locked. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. My nephew's whisper broke the silence, trembling but steady enough to cut through. "Don't look at him. If you look too long, he stays." I tore my gaze away, clutching him tighter. "What do we do?" His answer was barely audible. "You have to remember." The words struck deep. Memory. The fragments I'd been pushing down. The glimpses that clawed at the edges of my mind. I closed my eyes, trying to hold them, drag them forward. The closet door that never stayed shut. My parents whispering in panicked voices late at night. A promise I'd made when I was no older than my nephew now. "If you don't feed him, he'll follow you forever." The room groaned, the air thickening, pressing down. I forced my eyes open. He had moved. He was closer now, his towering frame bending forward, head inches from the lamp's glow. The light sputtered as if fighting for its life. I remembered another night. My father shaking me awake, his face pale and lined with terror. "Samson," he had whispered, "you have to give him something, or he'll take everything." He had shoved a box into my hands, cold and heavy. Inside, something had shifted, scratching faintly. I had been too young to understand, too scared to ask. I had done what I was told. I had opened the closet door, slid the box inside, and closed it again. My father had hugged me after, whispering that it would keep us safe, that the man would stay away. But he hadn't. He had been waiting. The lamp flickered again, then went out. Darkness swallowed us whole. My nephew whimpered, burying his face into my chest. The air vibrated with a low hum, a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere. Then a voice, low and smooth, curling around us like smoke. "You called me back." My skin prickled, every hair standing on end. My mouth was dry, my words broken. "What do you want?" The hum deepened, shaking the walls. His voice seeped into my bones. What was promised? The weight of memory crushed me. My parents' faces gaunt and weary, their eyes always darting to the shadows. My father's words, "If you don't feed him, he'll take everything." The truth hit like ice in my veins. That was why my parents had vanished. That was why the house was torn apart. They had run out of offerings, and now he had come for me. I tightened my arms around my nephew, shaking my head. "You can't have him." The dark pulsed thick and suffocating. The voice slid closer, almost tender. "Then you." The air grew colder, biting into my skin. My nephew's hand clutched at my shirt, his voice muffled against me. "Don't give in. If you do, he'll never stop." I thought of my parents. of their silence, their fear, their disappearance. They had given in once, and it had only delayed him. They hadn't stopped him. I looked into the black, forcing my voice steady. You want me? Then take me. Leave him. The room stilled. Silence stretched, sharp and endless. Then the shape moved, a ripple of shadow unfolding toward me. My chest burned with fear, but I didn't move. I kept my nephew behind me, shielding him with everything I had left. The shadow bent forward, its mouth stretching wider, endless, like the dark itself was opening to consume me. My body screamed to run, but I stayed. And then a sound split the silence. A knock. Sharp, sudden, impossible. 3 knocks on the door. The shadow froze. The room held its breath. Another knock followed, louder this time. My nephew lifted his head, eyes wide. They came back, he whispered. The dresser I had shoved against the door rattled as the knocks grew louder, shaking the walls. The shadow hissed, a sound like wind tearing through broken glass. He turned, his body twisting unnaturally toward the door. "Samson," a voice called, muffled but clear, a voice I hadn't heard in weeks. My mother's. My chest cracked open. "Mom?" The shadow lunged, its form stretching, blocking the door as if to keep me from reaching it. The air grew sharp, burning in my lungs. My nephew screamed, clutching at me. The knocks turned frantic. My father's voice now shouting, desperate. "Don't let him take you!" The shadow shrieked, a piercing sound that split through bone. My vision blurred, my body trembling under the weight of it. But something broke through, the warmth of my nephew's hand gripping mine, grounding me. "You don't have to feed him," he whispered fiercely. "You just have to stop looking." The words echoed sharp and clear. Stop looking. I closed my eyes, every instinct screaming against it, every nerve begging me to keep watching, to know where he was. But I shut them tight, clinging to my nephew, focusing only on the warmth of his hand, the sound of his breath. The shriek grew louder, then faltered. The air shifted, pulling back, lighter, thinner. The cold receded. The hum died, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the room was empty. The corner bare, the mirror clear. The knocks had stopped. I stumbled to the door, pulling the dresser aside with shaking arms. But when I yanked it open, the hallway stretched empty, silent. No one there. My nephew stood beside me, his small hand still clutching mine. His voice was soft, steady. "They tried too. They wanted to warn you." But he already had them. Tears burned my eyes. I pulled him close, burying my face in his hair. The morning light spilled through the thin curtains, pale and fragile, but real. For the first time in days, the air didn't feel heavy. We packed quickly, leaving the motel behind, the car carrying us toward the horizon. The words still echoed in my mind, but softer now, like an old scar. "He is here." Maybe he always would be. But he hadn't taken us. Not this time. As the miles passed, my nephew finally slept. His body relaxed, his breathing even. I drove on, the road stretching ahead, endless and uncertain. But I knew this much. As long as I remembered to stop looking, as long as I kept him close, we still had a chance. And for now, that was enough.